My name is Dorothea Linnell, and I've always believed in one principle above all else. You don't need to raise your voice to be heard if you strike at the right moment, in the right place. So before you sit down and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now, let me tell you about the girl who thought I was too old to notice, until I made one phone call that turned her world upside down. It started after my hip replacement. The surgery was successful, but the recovery left me unsteady and needing assistance for basic things: getting out of bed, preparing tea, taking short walks around the garden. My son Arthur lives 2 states away, and while he insisted on visiting, I didn't want to disrupt his life. So we agreed on hiring a caregiver through a reputable agency. That's how Camille arrived, 24, lively and always scrolling. She wore leggings, oversized sweatshirts, and earbuds, but she smiled when she spoke and helped me into my slippers without complaint. I could see the effort in her gestures, a bit clumsy but sincere. At first, she'd hum to herself in the mornings while making oatmeal chat about her boyfriend in vague terms. He's creative, works in tech but hates labels, and sometimes show me her manicure or a new TikTok trend. I would nod, amused by her energy. In some ways, I appreciated the noise. The house had been quiet for too long. But I've been around long enough to know when someone's trying to cover a trail. It was little things, really. The groceries would come back short, an item or two. My change never matched the receipt. Once I noticed her phone buzzing and she darted toward it like it held nuclear codes. I caught a glimpse, new model, glossy screen, far beyond what a caregiver's stipend would allow. That night, I sat in bed and stared at the ceiling fan spinning above. I wasn't angry yet, just aware. Camille was still pleasant. She called me Miss D. She posted pictures of flowers from my garden on her Instagram, never tagging me but captioning them with things like "clients with soul, Haas, healing spaces." I didn't mind. Let the youth romanticize their jobs. Until the wine went missing. A small bottle of Merlot, nothing fancy. It was supposed to accompany the chicken roast I had planned for Sunday. I asked casually, "Camille, have you seen the little red bottle I left by the sink?" Her eyes didn't flicker. "Oh, I think you might have already opened that one last week." I hadn't. I remember details. Always have. Of course, I said. Must be my mistake. The thing about having taught teenagers for over 3 decades is you learn to watch patterns, not just actions. That week, Camille seemed oddly giddy. She wore new sneakers. Her phone never left her side. And once, as I walked by the guest room, I heard her on a call whispering, "He loves it, babe. Like, actually loves it. It's so sleek." Said it's the first time he felt spoiled. Spoiled. I stood by the door, unmoving. Something clenched in my chest. Not hurt. Not fury. Just a cold, hard click of realization. I turned back to my room, sat at my desk, and pulled out the small notebook I used to track my blood pressure. I wrote one new heading at the top of a fresh page. Unusual expenses. I listed dates, purchase totals, missing items, bank withdrawals I hadn't remembered authorizing. Camille had access to my card for groceries, one of those conveniences I had granted without second thought. She always brought back receipts, except she had stopped doing that 2 weeks ago. From that night forward, I began to study her. When she left for her lunch breaks, I'd check the trash can in the guest room. Once I found a delivery receipt for a high-end phone brand, new, no discount applied. The name on the receipt was her boyfriend's. I recognized the last name because I'd once overheard her say it during a FaceTime call she didn't think I heard. She didn't know I taught phonetics. I hear more than I let on. Still, I said nothing. I smiled. Let her adjust my heating pad. Let her tell me she'd forgotten the peanut butter again. Let her answer texts at the dinner table. But the space in my notebook filled with scribbles, transaction IDs, and phone model specs. I didn't want justice from the law. I wanted something better. Camille had once let slip that she was rebuilding her relationship with her mother, a stern woman who had kicked her out at 19 for lying about money. "She's all about control," Camille said bitterly one day. "Like one mistake and she loses it." I didn't comment. But I remembered. I found the mother's name through the emergency contact form Camille had filled out on her first day. I found her number tucked away in the digital intake form archived on my desktop. I stared at the screen, then picked up the phone. Hello, came the voice on the other end. Steady, crisp. A woman who didn't like surprises. Hello, I said. My name is Dorothea Linnell. Your daughter works for me, and I believe we need to talk. There was a pause on the other end of the line, just a beat too long. Then came the reply. Is Camille all right? I let the question linger. I wanted her attention anchored, not scattered with assumptions. She's safe, I said softly, but I believe she's misrepresented herself. And I thought you of all people might want to know. Her voice firm and already suspicious pressed forward. Go on. I relayed only what mattered. Not the wine. Not the flowers. Not even the lie about the peanut butter. Just the facts. A few weeks ago, Camille started handling my grocery purchases. Small amounts at first. Then I noticed some unusual charges. A high-end phone ordered and shipped to someone who, based on her own words, is her boyfriend. There was silence again, but this time it buzzed. I didn't call the agency, I continued. I didn't call the police either, I thought. Perhaps you might prefer to hear this first. The woman's voice, when it returned, was ice over fire. I do not tolerate theft, Miss Linnell. I assumed as much, I said. Which is why I'd like to invite you over. Tomorrow. Noon. I'll be serving lunch. Camille doesn't know yet. She didn't hesitate. I'll be there. The call ended without pleasantries. I sat back in my chair, pulse calm, breath steady. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about clarity. About someone learning the line between freedom and betrayal. The next morning, I moved slowly but deliberately. I made my bed dressed in a soft lavender blouse I hadn't worn since my birthday and brewed mint tea strong enough to sting the tongue. Camille arrived humming a tune I didn't recognize. She looked fresh-faced. Her leggings pressed her oversized hoodie new. She asked if I wanted toast. I said yes. She didn't notice me watching her hands shake as she scrolled on her phone. A message flashed across the screen. Babe said thanks again. I owe you. We're gonna crush it. She locked the phone immediately. At 11:45, I asked her to help set the table. She placed the silverware with care, one fork askew, which I silently straightened. She chatted about a new podcast, something about healing trauma through inner child work. I nodded. At 11:59, there was a knock at the door. Camille glanced toward it mid-sentence. Want me to get? I'll get it, I said. I opened the door to a woman whose presence demanded silence. She looked to be in her late 50s, tall, slim, dressed in a sharply cut navy coat. Her hair was pinned in a no-nonsense twist. No jewelry. No smile. Mrs. DeWitt, I greeted. Come in. Camille's mother stepped inside. Her eyes scanned the space like a school inspector on surprise audit. Camille came around the corner, bright-eyed already mid-laugh, until she saw her. Mama. The word wasn't warm. It was stunned. A confession. She froze like a rabbit. What are you doing here? Camille asked, voice suddenly small. Mrs. DeWitt didn't answer. She removed her gloves with care, folding them into her purse. Dorothea invited me, she said. To lunch. I thought you were working, and I thought you were her mother, snapped. But apparently you've been shopping. Camille looked at me, then back to her mother, who took a seat at the dining table without invitation. I would like to hear your side, her mother said coolly. Before I speak mine. Camille stood frozen. I placed a glass of water in front of her. Sit, I said gently. She did. The quiet was oppressive. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Her mother tilted her head. Have you used this woman's money, Camille? Camille's voice cracked. I just borrowed it. I was going to pay it back. Her mother raised an eyebrow. With what? Influencer points. Camille flushed deep red. I didn't mean to steal. Intentions are only useful when followed by actions, her mother snapped. I reached out slowly and placed the printed receipt on the table. The phone purchase, the delivery address, the amount. I didn't call the police, I said softly, and I won't. But I did want this moment to happen. I think it's overdue. Camille's eyes flooded. She put her head in her hands. I was trying to help him. He lost his job. I thought if I could just give him something nice, something to believe in, he wouldn't leave. Her voice broke. I've already lost so many people. That admission landed differently. Even her mother blinked. Just once. You don't protect someone by breaking someone else, I said. Camille nodded a trembling, ruined nod. Then she looked at her mother and whispered something that sounded like, "I'm sorry." Her mother stood up, walked around the table, and for a long moment I wondered if she'd slap her. But she didn't. She simply said, "Apologize properly, and then pack your things." Camille looked up at her. "Here." Her mother didn't waver. "Kneel." Camille's legs folded beneath her. In front of me, in the middle of my quiet dining room beneath the painting of my late husband and our son, she lowered herself and whispered, "I'm so sorry, Miss Dorothea." I said nothing. I only nodded. The real punishment wasn't in law. It was in truth delivered not with rage, but with precision. After the apology, Camille's tears lingered like rain clouds that had forgotten how to leave. I didn't ask her to rise. I simply stood and began clearing the table, starting with her untouched plate. The smell of roasted chicken and rosemary potatoes filled the air, but no one moved to eat. Her mother remained standing, arms folded, watching her daughter with the kind of sternness only a parent who'd already given too many second chances could hold. "Get your things," she said, voice low. "You're done here." Camille stood slowly, shoulders hunched like a child caught red-handed. Her eyes flickered toward me, searching for mercy, maybe even hoping for it. I offered her neither cruelty nor comfort, just clarity. "I don't hate you, Camille," I said gently, "but you broke trust. And in my house, trust is the only currency that matters." She didn't answer, just nodded, her eyes never quite meeting mine again. As she disappeared down the hall, her mother let out a long sigh, like a valve releasing pressure after holding it in for too long. "She's done this before," she said, quieter now. "Not like this exactly, but close enough. Always some boy, always some fantasy she buys into." I nodded. I figured. She turned toward me, her eyes more tired than angry now. "You were smart not to yell. You made her kneel with truth, not threats." "I used to be a headmistress," I replied with a thin smile. "You'd be surprised how effective silence can be." We stood there in a moment of shared understanding. Two women shaped by responsibility, disappointment, and the necessity of strength. Camille reappeared 10 minutes later with a small duffel bag and eyes still rimmed red. Her mother didn't speak, didn't scold her. She just opened the front door and walked out first. Camille paused at the threshold. "I really am sorry," she said, her voice cracking one last time. I gave her a look that I hoped she'd remember, not cruel, not kind, but rooted in something firmer. Consequence. She left. The house was quiet again. The echo of the door clicking shut felt final. I walked slowly back to the table and sat down alone. The sun had shifted angles, casting longer shadows now across the floor. I looked at the empty plate where Camille had sat, and for a moment I felt a strange ache, not for her, but for how easily kindness could be mistaken for weakness. It's a painful thing to offer someone shelter and realize they only saw it as a roof, not a refuge. Still, I ate my lunch, slowly, methodically, one bite at a time. Later that evening, I pulled out the receipt one more time, then tore it in half, and then in half again. I didn't need it anymore. I wasn't interested in calling the agency. I had no desire to tell them what happened or ruin her chances elsewhere. The lesson had already been delivered by the one person she could never lie to, her mother. That's a wound that stings deeper than any court sentence. 3 days passed. Then I received a letter in the mail, handwritten, carefully folded. It was from Camille. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't plead for a second chance. She just wrote, "Miss Dorothea, I understand now. You didn't want to humiliate me. You wanted me to see myself clearly through someone else's eyes. I never knew truth could feel like this, quiet but impossible to ignore. Thank you for not turning me into a headline. Thank you for giving the story back to my mother instead. I'll do better. Camille." I placed the letter in a small wooden box where I keep old photos and my late husband's war medals. It didn't belong to the past, not quite. But it wasn't for the future either. It simply belonged in the chapter of quiet reckonings. Later that week, I hired a new caregiver. Older, quieter, with calloused hands and eyes that had seen things. Her name was Lorraine, and she didn't talk much, which suited me just fine. She asked once carefully, "What happened to the last girl?" "She forgot that honesty costs less than a new phone," I said. "We didn't speak of it again." But some nights as I sit in my armchair and sip my tea, I think of Camille, not with bitterness, but with the hope that somewhere she's learning the real value of what she almost lost. Not money, but the kind of dignity that doesn't raise its voice and still changes everything. The days after Camille left were like the settling of dust after a storm, not chaotic, but filled with the strange silence that follows something unspoken, but felt deeply. I kept moving. Lorraine, my new caregiver, arrived each morning with quiet steps and warm hands. She didn't try to fill the space with chatter or apologies for creaking floorboards. She simply existed beside me in a way that was respectful, present but never imposing. On her third day, I caught her gently straightening a photo frame on the mantel. It was one of Arthur and me from years ago. He must have been 12 arms thrown around my waist, his face pressed into my side like he never wanted to grow up. "You've got a lovely son," she said. I nodded. "He lives far now. Still calls, though. Still checks in." "Not everyone does," she murmured, and something about the way she said that told me she knew. Perhaps not the whole story, but enough to understand the type of ache you don't always name. But even as the routine resumed, something lingered beneath my skin. Not guilt, not sadness, something unresolved. Because Camille's betrayal wasn't isolated. It had touched something in me, some half-buried worry that perhaps this is what age meant now. Becoming convenient, becoming invisible. A walking target dressed up as a warm old woman with stories and a wallet. I kept thinking about her note. The part that stayed with me wasn't the apology. It was the line, "You didn't want to humiliate me. You wanted me to see myself." It was true. I hadn't wanted to break her down. I had wanted to hold up a mirror, one that her mother would make sure she couldn't ignore. But then came the unexpected ripple. 2 weeks after the incident, I received another visitor. I was in the garden pruning what was left of the lavender bush when Lorraine called out from the porch. "Miss Dorothea, you've got company." I turned, brushing dirt off my gloves. And there, standing at the gate in a neatly pressed blouse and long navy skirt, was Camille's mother. She had no purse, no gloves, just herself. I met her at the porch. "Mrs. DeWitt," I greeted. "This is a surprise." She offered a nod, tight but not cold. "I won't stay long. I just wanted to speak. Properly." I gestured toward the wooden bench on the porch. "Please." She sat stiffly, hands in her lap. "I wanted to thank you," she said after a pause. "Not just for what you did, but for how you did it. You gave me a way back into my daughter's life that I thought I'd lost." I raised an eyebrow. "You seem to have plenty of authority left when you walked through my door." Her lips twitched. "Authority, yes. Respect, not so much." Camille and I hadn't spoken properly in over a year. She thought I saw her as a failure. And truthfully, I did. Until I saw her kneel. She glanced at the garden, then back at me. "You reminded me that parenting doesn't end when they move out. It changes, sure. But the call to hold them accountable?" Her eyes glistened slightly. "That never fades." For a moment, we just sat, two mothers with too many pages in our books, both having borne the same heavy truth. That love and disappointment often live in the same breath. "She's staying with me for a while," she added, "doing some volunteer work. No boys, no phones." We agreed on that. I nodded. "I hope she finds something steady inside her." "She might," her mother said. "She just might." When she left, she didn't shake my hand. Instead, she placed it briefly over mine, firm, grateful, wordless. It was a gesture from one general to another, a salute in the language of women who've led long campaigns. After she left, I sat quietly and watched the lavender sway in the breeze. I thought of the seasons that had passed, of Camille's trembling hands and Lorraine's quiet diligence, of my husband's portrait in the hallway and Arthur's calls every Sunday. And I thought, perhaps revenge is overrated when truth wielded precisely delivers justice all the same. Not as spectacle, but as correction, as inheritance. I used to believe that some things in life were simply too small to worry about: missing change, forgotten groceries, a borrowed scarf never returned. But now with age I've come to learn, it's in those small things that character reveals itself. A person who forgets a dollar will likely forget a boundary. A person who lies once even kindly will lie again more cleverly. And a person who steals, They rarely do it for the thing. They do it for what they believe they deserve. That was what I couldn't shake about Camille. Not that she'd taken from me, but that somewhere in her mind she had convinced herself she deserved it. That I, in all my supposed comfort and softness, wouldn't notice, wouldn't mind. And perhaps in another life, she would have been right. But not in this one. Not with me. Lorraine, for her part, was a quiet balm. She never asked about Camille directly, though I could feel the question hovering in the quiet between cups of tea and crossword puzzles. But she respected the silence I chose. Until one afternoon. We were in the sitting room. Lorraine was dusting the bookshelf while I sat on the settee reading a worn copy of The Secret Garden. She paused, feather duster in hand. "I saw Camille last weekend," she said. I looked up slowly. At the community pantry near Jefferson. She was sorting dry goods. Alone. Head down. Didn't see me? I waited. She looked changed. Not broken. Just smaller. Quieter. I nodded once and returned my gaze to the book, but the words blurred. Later that night, I found myself pacing the hallway, slow, deliberate steps in the dim light. I stopped by the old oak cabinet where I kept letters and newspaper clippings tucked away in drawers lined with cedar paper. Camille's note was still there, folded neatly. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I remembered every word. But I slipped it into a manila envelope anyway, addressed it in my handwriting, and wrote a small card to go with it. Sometimes what we break is not beyond repair, only beyond our hands to fix. Keep learning. D. I didn't tell Lorraine. I just mailed it, and maybe that was the true end of it. But life has a way of circling back. Not with drama, but with echoes. Weeks passed. Fall gave way to winter. Lorraine and I settled into a rhythm as the days grew darker, the air heavier. My joints ached more, but the house felt balanced again. Until Christmas morning, a soft knock at the door too early for delivery. Lorraine was already in the kitchen prepping breakfast, humming Silent Night. I opened the door myself, and there on the step sat a small brown paper bag. No note, no ribbon, just taped shut. I looked around. No footsteps in the fresh snow, no figure retreating. Inside the bag was a tin of peppermint bark, a second-hand novel, Pride and Prejudice underlined passages throughout, and a folded donation receipt made out to the local women's shelter in my name. At the bottom in looping script. For Miss D. Thank you for planting the mirror. I'm growing from the reflection. I closed the door quietly and held the bag to my chest. No fanfare. No promises. Just growth. That night, as I sat beside the fireplace, I realized something I hadn't expected to feel about Camille. Pride. Not for what she had done, but for what she had chosen to become after. Revenge. It turns out isn't about watching someone burn. It's about giving them a match and watching whether they light a fire or a lantern. Camille had chosen light. After Christmas, the house returned to its usual rhythm. Slow mornings with tea and wool slippers, afternoon crossword puzzles, and Lorraine humming old hymns under her breath. The peppermint bark tin remained on the kitchen counter longer than necessary, its sweet scent a strange, soft ghost of what had passed. I didn't tell anyone about the gift. Not Arthur, not Lorraine, not even Camille's mother when she called on New Year's Day to offer a polite but stiff holiday greeting. Some stories I've learned lose their power when shared too soon. The donation receipt sat on my desk for days. I kept turning it over in my hands like it was something sacred. Not because of the amount, it wasn't much, but because of what it meant. Camille had chosen to redirect. She hadn't just said she'd change. She'd acted, and yet I didn't dare believe it fully. Not yet. You see, I've known too many people who said they'd change, when what they really meant was they wanted to escape the consequence. But Camille, she hadn't asked for forgiveness. She hadn't even asked to be seen. She had simply acted with dignity. The very thing she once treated like a costume. It made me wonder, had she finally understood the cost of character? Lorraine found me one evening in the den, staring at a painting of my late husband that hung above the fireplace. She brought me tea, but lingered longer than usual. "You've been quiet this week," she said gently. I smiled. I'm old Lorraine. Quiet is my default setting. She sat beside me anyway. Not this kind of quiet. I hesitated, then finally spoke. Did you ever have someone disappoint you so deeply you almost forgot how to care? And then they do something that makes you remember who they could have been all along. She blinked. Yes. My youngest sister. She was a storm of a woman. Stole from our mother. Lied to our father. Ran off at 16. Didn't speak to any of us for years. What changed? One day she sent Mama a box. Inside was every letter we'd ever written, her kept bundled, pressed flat, like dried flowers. There was no note, just a photograph of her holding her own baby. She'd named her Hope. I nodded, my chest tightening with something that wasn't quite sadness. People don't change overnight, I said. But sometimes they start turning around just enough for the light to catch their face again. She patted my hand. Then we'd best leave a light on, just in case. That night, I walked down the hallway past the guest room Camille once used. The bed was neatly made, the dresser still empty. I paused at the doorway, unsure why. Maybe because spaces hold echoes. Maybe because I wanted to see if I could feel anything at all. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. I just stood there and whispered, "Don't waste the mercy you've been given." And then I closed the door. The next day, Lorraine brought in the mail. One envelope stood out, cream-colored, thick, hand-addressed. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of heavy paper with the words, "Miss Dorothea, there are not many people who would choose grace when vengeance is easier. Thank you for showing me the difference. I've applied to take night classes in social care. I want to work in shelters. Help women like the ones I used to think I was better than. You were never just a job. You were a reflection I wasn't ready for. Now I am. Camille." I pressed the paper to my chest and breathed in. I hadn't expected anything, and somehow that made it mean everything. Not because it changed the past, but because it proved something I had stopped daring to hope for. That when given the chance, some people don't just kneel, they rise. A week later, I received a call from the agency. Not about Camille. Not about complaints or refunds or legalities. Just a simple check-in. A new director had taken over and was reviewing client files to ensure quality assurance. "How was your experience with Mrs. Camille DeWitt?" The voice on the line asked politely, clipboard smooth. "Any concerns you'd like to document?" I paused, fingers resting on the ceramic edge of my teacup. The fire crackled in the hearth behind me, Lorraine humming faintly in the kitchen. There was a version of me that wanted to say it all. How Camille had lied, stolen, and twisted trust into currency for someone else's affection. But that version of me no longer held the reins. "She made a mistake," I said, "and she's working to correct it." That's all I'll say. There was a beat of silence on the other end. Then the voice thanked me and moved on. When I hung up, I sat still, the quiet thicker than usual. Not heavy, just full like the air before the first snow. I thought of how easy it would have been to leave a mark on her record, to pass along my pain as fact, to let that one chapter define her entire story. But I hadn't, because I knew what that would do. When I was a headmistress, there was a boy named Dennis McAllister. Poor as dust, angry as fire. He stole from the cafeteria twice. When I caught him the second time, I sat him down and asked what he thought his future would look like. He stared at the floor and said, "Whatever you write down, miss." That broke something in me. I realized that adults were often handed the pen to write someone else's story, especially if that someone was young and messy and still learning. So I didn't expel Dennis. I made him work in the library after school instead. 3 years later, he wrote me a letter from his college dorm. Said the smell of old books reminded him of redemption. That lesson had followed me into old age. When you wield authority, you also wield the power to either punish or plant. Camille had given me reason for both, and I had chosen the latter. Later that afternoon, Lorraine brought in another bundle of mail, mostly catalogs, bills, the usual. But there was one more letter. The return address, Camille DeWitt. Again, this one was shorter. "Miss D. I started my classes this week. I'm the oldest in the room, not by age, but by experience. I finally understand what you meant when you said trust is the only real currency in your house. I keep my receipts now, literally and metaphorically. Thank you again, Camille." I smiled, folded the letter, and tucked it into the same wooden box with her first note. 2 pages now. different ink. Different girl. That night, I wrote a note of my own. Not to her, but to myself. I folded it and placed it under the ceramic teacup on my nightstand, where I'd find it when the world felt gray. Grace is never wasted. Even if they don't deserve it, sometimes they grow into it. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight spilling across the floor, my teacup still warm from the night before, and Lorraine opening the curtains with a smile. "Sleep well?" she asked. I nodded. "I dreamed of gardens. Overgrown, but blooming," she chuckled. "Sounds like someone's mind is restless." "No," I said, holding the warmth of the cup between my palms. "It's just finally at peace." Somewhere in the city, Camille was sitting in a classroom holding a pen, not realizing that for the first time in her life, she wasn't rewriting someone else's script. She was writing her own, and perhaps that was my true revenge, not her downfall, but her becoming. There's a peculiar kind of silence that comes with closure, not the empty sort that follows a loss, nor the heavy one after a fight, but something gentler, a stillness earned, a silence that no longer aches. That was the quiet I lived in now. Mornings with Lorraine had become ritual. She brought me my tea with a splash of lemon and no questions. We sat together sometimes without speaking, watching the robins peck around the garden or the wind rustle the dry branches of the oaks that stood like sentinels in the yard. One such morning, I stood at the window watching the light shift on the snow, and I saw it. A woman young, bundled in a navy coat, hood-down scarf tucked neatly at her neck. She paused at the gate, then turned and walked away. I knew that walk. Camille hadn't come to be seen. She had come to see. I didn't mention it to Lorraine. Some things don't need to be confirmed to be understood. Instead, I sat down at my desk and pulled out a fresh piece of stationery. I didn't know if I would send it. That wasn't the point. Sometimes words are just for the air, for the ghosts, for the roots of the person we're becoming. Dear Camille, you don't owe me anything. But if you ever return, not as a caregiver, not as a penitent daughter, but as a woman who knows the shape of her own shadow, I will open the door. Not because I expect a new version of you, but because I believe in the one you're growing into. There's a room here that taught you something. You're welcome to remember it always. Dorothea. I folded it, tucked it into an envelope, and placed it in the drawer beside her others. The past no longer had sharp edges. It had softened into memory, layered like pressed flowers between pages of a book I had stopped needing to read aloud. That evening, Arthur called. "Hey, Mom," he said, voice full of that casual care he always tried to disguise as routine. "Hello, darling," I said. "How's the city?" "Loud, cold, and expensive. The usual." He chuckled. "How are you doing? You need anything?" "No," I said, glancing at Lorraine through the kitchen doorway as she hummed and chopped vegetables. "I'm quite looked after." There was a pause. "You sure? I could fly out next weekend if—" "No need, but thank you." I hesitated, then added, "You know, Arthur, sometimes the best gift a child can give is the peace of not worrying their parent." He laughed softly. "You always say things like that. Little truths wrapped in riddles. I say them because they're true." After we hung up, I sat in the quiet again. Only it didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. I thought of all the people who had walked through my life and left fingerprints. Some stained, some healed, some like Camille both. And I realized something else. Poetic revenge isn't about making someone kneel. It's about making sure they know why they stood back up. Camille had knelt in shame, but she was rising now in classrooms, in pantries, in small kind acts without witness. That was the kind of retribution life rarely celebrates, but always remembers. Because there's nothing more powerful than a woman who learns her lesson, and then becomes one. It was sometime in February when I received the next letter. This one was different. No envelope. Just a thick sheet of stationery folded and hand-delivered. Lorraine found it tucked behind the garden gate, weighed down by a smooth stone wrapped in twine like a secret. She brought it to me with a raised brow. No name, no return address. Just this. I unfolded it slowly, fingers brushing the clean ridges of the paper. It read, "Miss Dorothea, we were assigned a reflection essay in class this week about a person who changed our trajectory without punishment or praise. I wrote about you. My professor said it read like fiction. I told him the best stories are always true. Thought you should know your name is somewhere in a classroom full of strangers now. Not as a victim, not as a headline, but as a compass. See, no signature beyond that single self-possessed initial. Just the quiet certainty of someone beginning to own their voice. I read the letter 3 times, each slower than the last. Lorraine didn't ask about it. She simply waited nearby, tea towel in her hand, watching me, the way only someone who's seen a person heal can watch them. "She's still writing," I finally said. Lorraine gave me a half smile. "So are you." And that was true in ways I hadn't expected. My journal, once reserved for blood pressure notes and idle shopping lists, was now full of entries about grace, about memory, about the strange satisfaction of choosing patience over punishment. My handwriting had changed to sharper, steadier, more deliberate. I had started writing letters I'd never send. To Arthur, to my late husband, to the girl I had been at 22, full of fear and ambition, before motherhood and widowhood had made me soft in places and steel in others. Camille wasn't the only one who'd been transformed. She'd taken from me, yes, but she'd also given me something unintentional, a moment to reawaken my own voice. A reminder that age doesn't mean irrelevance, that boundaries aren't fences, they're mirrors, and that sometimes the deepest cuts don't bleed. They teach. That spring the garden bloomed early. The lavender bushes came back thicker than before. The roses, too. Lorraine said it was the mulch and the luck of a warm winter, but I knew better. The earth responds to the truth that lives above it. One morning, while pruning a stubborn corner of the hedge, I found another small envelope. Tucked inside the gatepost this time. She was getting cleverer. It wasn't a letter, just a photograph. Camille in a classroom, mid-sentence, hands gesturing wide, her face lit with intent. A student beside her was smiling, holding a clipboard. On the back she had written just one line. "Still kneeling, Miss D. Just differently now?" I traced the handwriting with my thumb and exhaled a long, slow breath that felt like it had waited a lifetime to leave my lungs. There are victories that come loud with fireworks, speeches, applause. And then there are victories like this, delivered in silence, carried by humility, wrapped in the soft paper of a life finally beginning to bloom. I returned to the porch, set the photo in a frame beside Arthur's graduation picture, and sat back with my tea. From the kitchen, Lorraine called out, "Letters again." "Photograph," I replied. "She's still thinking of you." I smiled, my eyes fixed on the image. "I think I said she's finally thinking of herself." Spring was in full swing now, and the neighborhood was stirring back to life. Children rode their bikes past my picket fence. The scent of fresh-cut grass replaced the stillness of winter air. Even the mailman seemed more cheerful, whistling as he left envelopes in the box. I sat on the porch most mornings, wrapped in a light shawl, watching the garden stretch its limbs. Lorraine would come and go with her quiet grace, bringing breakfast, watering the hanging ferns, and reading her mystery novels in the corner when I didn't feel like talking. But one morning she paused mid-step, holding a newspaper. "You've been mentioned," she said, setting the paper down gently on the table beside me. I raised a brow. "In the obituaries, I hope." She grinned. "Better?" The article was small, tucked into the local section. A column titled "New Faces in Old Places, Profiles in Change." It featured a series of interviews with new community volunteers and adult learners. And there she was, Camille DeWitt, pictured in a borrowed blazer, smiling a cautious, half-proud smile in front of the women's shelter downtown. I read every word. She spoke about second chances, about accountability, about trust. But what caught my eye was this. When you've wronged someone who didn't retaliate but instead reflected you back to yourself, you either run or you rise. No names, no salacious details, just truth, rendered clean and deliberate. "She's doing the work," I said aloud. Lorraine nodded. "Sounds like she found her mirror." I clipped the article and pinned it to the corkboard in my study. It joined old photographs, postcards from Arthur, a note from my late husband written in faded ink. "We don't raise our voices in this house. We raise our standards." Camille, it seemed, had learned that same lesson without needing to be screamed at, sued, or shamed. But that afternoon, something even more unexpected arrived. A letter. Not from Camille. From her mother. It was handwritten, elegant, cursive, thick paper folded with precision. Dear Miss Linnell, I hope this note finds you well. I wanted to write to you not as Camille's mother but as a woman who has spent years believing she had failed as one. After our lunch at your home, Camille and I began the slow work of rebuilding. I did not expect her to forgive me. I did not expect her to trust me again. But your decision to include me in that moment, to hand the baton of accountability to me, instead of the police or press, restored something I didn't even know I'd lost. You gave her a lesson I never could. That grace can hurt, and that's why it works. Camille is changing. She comes home tired not from drama but from purpose. She reads books again. She talks less about boys and more about women. Thank you. Not just for what you did, but for the way you did it. Sincerely, Margaret DeWitt. I read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in the same drawer with Camille's earlier letters. That drawer had become a garden of its own, blooming with moments that had begun in betrayal and grown into something rare, redemption. That evening, I sat by the fire nursing a cup of chamomile tea and thought about all the things I had almost done. I had almost reported her, almost shamed her, almost let someone else decide what she deserved. But instead, I had chosen the road that required more risk and infinitely more faith. I had called her mother, not the police. And that single act had become the fulcrum on which everything had turned. Not all justice is about punishment. Some justice is about passing the truth into the right hands and trusting that they'll carry it with care. Camille had been a thief once, of money, of trust. But now she was a mirror, a story, a warning, a beginning. And perhaps most importantly, she was her mother's daughter again. I didn't expect to see Camille again in person. Her letters, her progress, her quiet appearances outside the gate, they were enough. Symbols, not disruptions. I had filed her away in my soul like an old piano tune. Occasionally recalled, deeply felt, no longer haunting. But fate, as it often does, decided I wasn't finished with her. It happened during one of my rare outings. Lorraine had insisted I get some sun, so we drove to the weekly open-air market downtown. Stalls of fresh bread and sunflowers stretched under canopies, and local musicians played slow jazz beside a cafe cart. I wore a wide-brimmed hat and a pair of vintage sunglasses, armor and anonymity in equal measure. I was inspecting a jar of honey when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Low, measured, unmistakable. Miss D. I turned. There she was. Camille. Hair shorter now, neater. No false lashes. No trendy sunglasses perched on her head. She wore a simple navy blouse and slacks. No headphones. No distractions. Just her. Fully present. Camille, I said, neutral but not cold. She took a hesitant step forward. I didn't mean to interrupt. I saw you, and I wasn't sure if I should say anything. But she exhaled. I didn't want to run. I nodded slowly. Then you've already changed more than you think. She offered a soft, tentative smile. I'm volunteering with the outreach van today. We're handing out hygiene kits and first aid supplies. This stop's part of our route. Good, I said. Helping others can be a kind of mirror, too. We stood there in silence for a beat. The buzz of market life swirling around us. I read your article, I said. You quoted me. Camille blushed. I was hoping you'd see it. I wanted you to know I meant every word. I believed you the moment you didn't ask for forgiveness. She looked down, then up again, eyes clearer than I'd ever seen them. May I ask you something? Go ahead. Do you think I'll ever be allowed to forget what I did? I considered that. It wasn't the question of a girl trying to outrun guilt. It was the question of a woman trying to understand where memory ends and redemption begins. No, I said. But that's not the goal. The goal is to remember it without it defining you. She nodded slowly. That's what I'm learning. Good. A beat passed. She lifted a hand as if to shake mine, then hesitated. I reached out first. Her fingers closed around mine, warm, grounded, present. No tremble. No apology hidden in the gesture. Just a handshake. Just two women who had walked through a fire and come out changed. I won't keep you, she said. I've got to help set up. I tilted my head. Be gentle, but firm. She grinned. I learned from the best. And just like that, she turned and walked away, confident, calm, carrying a clipboard and a box of donated socks. Lorraine emerged from behind a stand of tulips holding a paper bag. Well, she said that looked intense. It wasn't, I replied. It was right. As we drove home, I thought about that question Camille had asked me. Do we ever forget? And I realized forgetting isn't the goal. The goal is integration. To take what once shamed you and braid it into the woman you've become. Not to erase the past, but to stand taller because of it. That night, I wrote in my journal, she met my eyes. She met her past. And she kept walking forward. That is what healing looks like. A few days after our unexpected reunion at the market, I received something in the mail I hadn't anticipated. An invitation, printed on modest cream cardstock. No frills, no elaborate calligraphy. Just clear, concise lettering. You are invited to attend the spring certification ceremony for community support and outreach workers. Camille DeWitt, graduating class representative. Thursday 6th, 00 p.m., Jefferson Civic Center. Light refreshments to follow. At the bottom, in a smaller handwritten note, it would mean the world to me if you came. You were the first person who believed I could become more. See, I held the card for a long while. Lorraine, folding laundry nearby, noticed my stillness. What is it? She asked. A ceremony, I said finally. Camille's. She turned to face me, a little surprised. And, are you going? I didn't answer immediately. Not because I didn't know, but because I needed to honor the weight of that decision. Then I nodded. Yes, I think I will. So on Thursday, I pulled out one of my old navy dresses, simple and sharp. I pinned my silver hair back, applied a touch of lipstick, and wore the same pearl earrings I had worn the day Arthur graduated from college. Lorraine drove me, though she refused to come inside. This is yours, she said. Not mine. The Civic Center smelled like old carpet and spring flowers. Rows of chairs were filled with community workers, social workers, volunteers, family. It wasn't a large ceremony, but it pulsed with purpose. The kind of event that mattered not because of scale, but because of meaning. I sat in the second row, blending in unseen, until Camille walked on stage. She wore a tailored blazer, dark green. Her hair was neatly braided and pinned back. No jewelry, no makeup, just Camille refined. When they called her name to deliver the graduation address, the applause was warm, but mine stayed silent. Not because I didn't celebrate her, but because I was letting her moment belong entirely to her. She stepped to the podium, paused, then scanned the crowd. Our eyes met. Just for a second. Then she began. I used to think growth was loud, she said. That it came through declarations and Instagram quotes and public redemption stories. A soft chuckle from the crowd. But I've learned that real change happens in quiet rooms, in private apologies, in handwritten letters, and in moments when someone older and wiser chooses not to punish you, but to reflect you back to yourself. I froze. She's talking about you. Someone whispered beside me. Camille continued. I made a mistake. A series of them, actually. I broke trust, betrayed kindness, and took what wasn't mine. But instead of being thrown away, I was handed back to someone who knew how to make consequences into catalysts. Her voice didn't break. It didn't waver. I want to spend the rest of my life doing for others what she did for me, seeing the story behind the sin, offering reflection instead of revenge. That's what this work means to me. When the speech ended, the audience stood in applause. I remained seated. Still, tears didn't fall, but something in my chest opened. Not grief, not pride, something deeper. Closure. After the ceremony, she found me outside by the garden wall. I didn't expect you to come, she said softly. I didn't expect to be invited, I replied. She smiled smaller this time, more sincere. Thank you for giving me the space to become this version of myself. You did the becoming, I said. I just handed you the mirror. She looked at the flowers blooming beside us. I want to do the same for someone else now. You already are, I said. She took my hand just briefly, then released it. Can I write to you again? Always. And with that, she turned and walked into the evening, no longer the girl who had arrived at my home months ago, humming pop songs and hiding behind charm. She was a woman now. And I I was no longer her victim. I was her turning point. Time, when measured not in years but in lessons, has a curious rhythm. After Camille's graduation, I found myself returning to the small drawer of letters, more often not out of nostalgia, but out of recognition. Each envelope, each folded piece of paper carried more than just ink. They carried weight, growth, the echoes of someone who had finally begun to live in her own name, not the shadows she once left behind. Lorraine noticed the shift in me. "You walk lighter now," she said one morning, passing me my cup of tea. "Something's unknotted." I smiled, though I didn't know if I agreed. Maybe I've just stopped dragging old wounds like luggage. She chuckled. "That's still lighter, Miss Dorothea." We were sitting by the window, the first hints of summer turning the air warm and syrupy. Birds chattered in the hedges. A breeze stirred the lace curtain. And just then, a soft knock echoed from the front door. Lorraine answered it. A few minutes later, she returned, holding a small square package wrapped in brown paper. "No return address again," she said, grinning. "Our favorite ghost." I opened it carefully. Inside was a hardbound book, Jane Eyre, a vintage edition, worn but clearly loved. Tucked between the pages was a note. "Miss D. You once gave me space to rewrite myself. I've filled my shelves with women who did the same. Jane Scout Seth, Esther Joe. They are my companions now. Not the boys who needed fixing. Not the versions of myself who begged for less than I deserved. This one's for you." I underlined the parts that felt like you speaking to me, even when you weren't there. "See." I flipped through the pages, fingers pausing at underlined lines. "I am no bird, and no net ensnares me. I am a free human being with an independent will. I care for myself. The more solitary, the more friendless, the more unsustained I am, the more I will respect myself." It was the most thoughtful gift I had received in years. Not because of the book itself, but because of who she had become in order to give it. Later that afternoon, I pulled a small box from beneath my bed. Inside were mementos I hadn't touched in years, photos of Arthur as a boy, dried roses from my husband's funeral, a gold pin I used to wear when giving speeches. I added the book to it, not as an end, but as a reminder. We think revenge must look like courtrooms or confrontations, but sometimes revenge is softer, quieter. It's in showing someone that their worst mistake didn't have the final word. It's in watching them write a new chapter. Camille had done that, not once, but again and again. And with each new page, I could feel my own story shifting. That evening, as twilight bled into the corners of the house, I took my journal and wrote. She brought me Jane Eyre, not as apology, as evidence that she now knows her story belongs to her. And then I wrote one last line, small, underlined, barely visible. The girl who stole from me gave me back something greater. Belief. I suppose I always believed that healing had an expiration date, that after a certain age or a certain betrayal, you simply settle into the ache, like it's a creaky floorboard. You learn where it is, how to avoid stepping on it too hard. But Camille proved me wrong. In the weeks following her graduation, I heard from her more regularly, not through grand gestures, but through the ordinary. A postcard from a shelter in Westbridge where she was shadowing a trauma counselor. A single daisy left on my porch with no note, just a green ribbon tied around the stem. An email? Yes, she had found my email sharing a quote she'd read in class. "Forgiveness is not an occasional act. It is a constant attitude." Martin Luther King Jr., and yet, through all of these gestures, she never once asked for anything in return. She didn't seek approval. She didn't beg to be seen. She simply kept showing up, in ways that told me the mirror I'd handed her hadn't shattered. One afternoon, Lorraine found me standing in front of the hallway mirror, holding the framed photo of Camille giving her speech. "She's become someone," Lorraine said, joining me. "Someone you helped shape." "No," I replied. "Someone she fought to meet." I thought about the girl who once knelt on my rug sobbing over a phone and a mistake she didn't know how to name. And then I thought of the woman who now led support groups, quoted literature, and left daisies like prayers. That's when it hit me. Redemption doesn't erase the past. It rewrites the ending. And perhaps that's the most generous revenge of all, not letting the wound define you, but allowing it to carve out something stronger. Camille had learned that So had I. That weekend, I invited a few neighbors over for tea, something I hadn't done in years. We sat in the garden surrounded by the smell of jasmine and lemon cake and talked about everything and nothing. Miss Dorothea, one of the younger women, asked, "How do you stay? So calm, so dignified." I smiled, because once someone stole from me, and I didn't call the police, I called her mother. The table burst into surprised laughter, but I didn't elaborate. The story wasn't for everyone. Some things are more powerful when they remain yours. Later that evening, after everyone had gone, I found another envelope tucked into the side gate. Camille again. Only this time, it wasn't a letter. It was a photograph of her standing beside a group of women, smiling arms draped around each other, holding a banner that read, "Healing isn't linear, but it's possible." On the back, she had written, "You taught me that accountability is the doorway. Grace is the key. I'm holding the door open now for the next woman who thinks she's too far gone, because you held it open for me." I placed the photo beside the book she had gifted me beneath the paperweight shaped like a swan. Arthur gave me one Mother's Day long ago. I stood there for a long while, not thinking, just feeling. Then I whispered to no one in particular, "Let her become everything she thought she had ruined." And I meant it. Summer settled into the bones of the house. The creaks were softer now, wood warmed by sunlight instead of chilled by memory. Evenings bled longer, and the jasmine outside my bedroom window perfumed the air with a sweetness that made it hard to feel anything but alive. Lorraine baked more often these days. We'd sit on the porch with lemon scones and too hot tea, laughing at nothing. Not because life was without sorrow, but because the sorrow no longer had claws. One Sunday morning, I received a voicemail from Arthur. "Hey, Mom. Just wanted to say I read about Camille's shelter work." It came across my desk actually through a colleague in the nonprofit circle. "I didn't know she was connected to you. Looks like you made a bigger difference than you thought." I listened to that message twice. Then I saved it. Maybe one day I'd replay it when I needed reminding that the quiet choices, the mercies no one sees, echo louder than anger ever could. And then life did something I didn't expect. It offered closure. A letter came. This time not from Camille, not from her mother, not even anonymously. It was from one of the women in Camille's group. "Dear Miss D, you don't know me, but someone you believed in me. Camille said you didn't shout at her. You didn't throw her out into the cold. You called her mother. You made her face the right truth, not the convenient one. And because of that, she had the strength to tell me the truth about myself. I've been clean for 9 months. I'm learning to knit. I wrote a poem for my daughter's birthday and read it to her without crying. You weren't even in the room, but you're part of this too. Thank you. Sincerely, Martha." I folded that letter more carefully than I ever had with the others. There are victories you never expect to see. Wins you didn't aim for. Ripples in the lives of strangers, because one day you chose dignity over destruction. That's what this was. Not the end of a story, but the birth of a legacy. Later that week, I asked Lorraine to help me clean the guest room. We dusted the old dresser, opened the windows, changed the sheets. "Expecting someone?" she asked, half teasing. "No," I said with a smile. "But the room deserves to feel like a possibility again." She nodded. "Hope has good taste in linen." We laughed. But deep down we both knew. The room had changed. Not just in scent or color or tidiness. It was no longer haunted. It was ready. And me, I wasn't waiting. But I was open. Because the girl who once betrayed me had become a woman who restored others. And I, an old woman with her stories and her tea, had lived long enough to see that sometimes the kindest revenge is letting someone rise where they once fell, not by lifting them, but by refusing to keep them down. The room is quiet now. No letters, no knocks at the gate, no unexpected gifts tucked into the folds of my daily life. But I'm not lonely, because silence when chosen becomes sanctuary. There's a photo on my mantle now, Camille standing beside 3 women, all smiling, all radiant, with the kind of strength that doesn't need to shout. Above them, hand-painted on a banner, the words, "Dignity, accountability, grace." I didn't ask her to include that last word, but she did. And now I see it everywhere in the pages of the book she gave me, in the way Lorraine refills my teacup before I ask, even in the way Arthur listens longer when we talk on the phone. This house has held many things: grief, betrayal, forgiveness. But now it holds growth, not the kind you measure in achievements. The kind you feel in the stillness when you realize the people who hurt you have changed because of how you chose to respond. I never raised my voice. I never made her beg. I simply called her mother. And that call became a door she'd spend the next year walking through, slowly, deliberately carrying pieces of herself she never thought she'd reclaim. And me, I remain a witness, not to her fall, but to her rise. That's what matters most in the end. Not who was right, but who chose to break the cycle, and who learned to bloom in the silence that followed.